Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to Our Plant Stories. This is a story about a small pot plant, a yucca, that outgrew its pot.
Yeah, so you can see where I pruned some of the trunks back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at least. There. 8, 9, 10. So it must have had 10 when I took it from the house. Yeah, there's my father for you.
I'm sitting in Fay Ballard's garden in London on a beautiful sunny day. Fay is an artist, a botanical artist, and she is the elder daughter of the novelist J.G. Ballard, which is relevant to this story.
I'd started my first term at the University of Sussex in 1976, and I was coming back for Christmas, and I went into Brighton and thought, what shall I buy my dad for Christmas? And I decided to buy him a very small yucca plant from Marks and Spencer's. I mean, it was probably about a foot high in total with the pot, plastic pot. And I gave him the plant for Christmas. And, I didn't expect him to keep it, or I thought, maybe it'll die or whatever. But no, a completely different story happened.
So what year are we talking again?
So we're talking 1976. And I remember Marks and Spencer's being full of yuccas. And I've been thinking ever since, why are we buying yuccas in this country? Why did Marks and Spencer's think it was a good idea to sell yuccas? And that, when I go to Homebase or other places, I can still see yuccas. So, what made somebody take a commercial decision that the British public would like to buy yuccas?
It's such a good question. I'd love to know the answer. There must have been a buyer somewhere who saw them and saw an opportunity. Maybe we'll have to search that one out a little more.
I'd like to know. I think it would be very interesting.
Stay with us, because we will be answering that question. So can you remember your dad's response to the plant?
Well, he was very loving, and he brought the children up on his own. So my brother and sister and me. Our mother had died when I was 7, and my brother was 9, and my sister was 5. Incredibly loving father, very enthusiastic, always loved seeing us and loved everything we did, including gifts. What
made you choose that plant for him? Was there something about the yucca that you instinctively knew he would like?
Yes, I think so. My father was born and brought up in Shanghai. He was born in 1930 in Shanghai. His parents had left the UK to set up a factory in Shanghai, printing textiles. My father loved the city as a small boy, and he's written about going off into Shanghai on his own on his bike. He loved the tropics, or I think it's actually a humid subtropical climate there. But he loved the climate, he loved the sun. I imagine he loved the plants. And I think in 1976, as a 19-year-old, I was probably thinking, what would Daddy really like? Yes, some sort of tropical plant will appeal to him.
Did he have any other houseplants?
No, he had no houseplants at all.
So tell me, what happens to this houseplant?
Well, I think, as a young woman, I probably didn't expect to see the plant again, because, my father loved writing, and that's what he wanted to do, and I didn't think he would want to spend much time watering a plant, or let alone caring for it. Housework wasn't top of his agenda. He was a great believer in in writing. However, what happened was very interesting. In Shepperton, there was a small garage where he'd always get his petrol, and indeed where he'd always buy his cars. And he loved Ford cars because it reminded him at that time of America, large Ford cars. So anyway, he would go off to the petrol station, get his petrol, and every time he went, he bought a little bottle of baby bio. He'd bring it back, and he would then decant the whole bottle into the pot, I guess with some water. And he used to laugh and joke with me that this was the way of feeding and caring for the plant. And indeed, after several years, the plant got bigger and bigger. And he even repotted it, because every so often I'd see a much larger plastic pot. And at some point, it left the table in the front room where it had been, and it went onto the floor in the front room next to an exercise bicycle which he'd bought and only used once. I suppose it was one day when he decided he wanted to keep fit and lose his stomach, but he only used it once. He couldn't be bothered. Anyway, the yucca was next to the exercise bicycle, and it grew and grew and grew. And every time I went home, I noticed there was another shoot, and each shoot was trying to find the sun. So it was growing up against the 1930s curved window, and it had maybe 6 or 7 shoots, all pressing against the window, trying to get through the net curtain into the daylight, I suppose. So it almost became a sort of monster. But I thought a lot about it because obviously it was very, very important to my father. And when my father died in 2009, well, actually just before he died, he had prostate cancer, so he knew he was going to die. He and I would drive to Shepperton in my car, and we would water the yucca together. It became a ritual. We went every fortnight to collect the post for about a year before he died, and we watered the yucca. And when he died, I kept going. I kept going every fortnight, collect the post, always water the yucca. And when the winter came, I decided to turn off the water supply because I didn't want frozen pipes. So I would always take bottles of water with me and always water the yucca. And the yucca came to represent him. It became him. And I wanted to keep the yucca alive because it was a way of keeping him alive. So I'd projected him into the yucca.
Come the point that you had to make a decision about the house and the yucca, what did you do?
Well, I knew I wanted to save the yucca, and I knew I was going to take it home with me, but I didn't know how. So when I was clearing the house, I thought, right, okay, got to get that yucca somehow into my car. But
By this point, describe how big it was. Can you visually describe what it looked like if we'd walked into that room?
Okay, so you imagine a 1930s room with one of those, long horizontal windows that bends towards the front door. Imagine a large plastic terracotta coloured pot on the floor, very large, and the yucca coming out of it and growing the length, the width of the whole room, starting at one end of the window and then pressing against the window right to the other side of the window and beyond. And I also noticed that some of the dead shoots, I suppose they weren't dead shoots actually, they were probably discarded dry leaves, had poured themselves over the table that was up against the window. And this was a large table from Shanghai that his parents had as a large dining table, probably seating 10 people. So the dead leaves were pressing up against the table as well, and then had fallen like a cascade of leaves to the ground around the chairs. So if you looked at the room, if you came into the room, the plant had completely dominated the entire exterior wall of that particular room. And I noticed too that towards the end of his life, my father moved his typewriter from his study, which was in the other room facing the back garden, into this room that faced the road. And I wondered, there he was with the typewriter next to the yucca, and whether the yucca at that point in his life was actually reminding him too of his childhood that had been so important to him and so influential on his writing. And was the yucca, almost like some sort of manifestation of his obsessions, his memory, his childhood passions. It felt almost like some sort of art installation, to be honest. Some sort of jungle, interior jungle that he was inhabiting.
That's a beautiful description. You can really see that in one's mind's eye. So what did you do?
So I thought, right, I'm taking it. I'm going to prune it. Now, I know nothing about gardening, even though I actually trained as a botanical artist, which I think is quite funny. Anyway, going back to the pruning, I took a pair of secateurs down to Shepperton, to the house, and I decided to cut off most of the shoots, because that way I could then just about get the pot and a few of the remaining shoots into the car. And I put the pot and the very heavily pruned shoots on my patio. And at that point, I had, coming every fortnight, a couple of gardeners to mow the lawn and indeed prune the shrubs in the garden. And I came out, they just left, and I came out, and to my horror, the pot had vanished. I ran to their van and cried. I was crying at them. What have you done? Where is it? Where is it? And they looked at me as if I was a mad woman. They opened up the boot, and there was the pruned yucca in its plastic pot, which I retrieved. I mean, they were completely bemused, I could see. They thought I was just some sort of crazy middle-aged mad woman. And I returned it to the patio. And then I thought, and they said to me, that's right, they said to me, it'll never grow, it's dead. You may as well accept it's dead. And I thought, no way am I going to accept it's dead, because it's my father and it's going to live. So I then started I didn't know what to do with it. I started to water it a bit. I repotted it in a larger pot. I thought maybe that would help. And then I had a new gardener, George Halford, who was brilliant. George said, look, we're going to try and make this work. So he decided to repot it again and cut off some of the roots. He didn't give it any feed. I think he used a little bit of stuff on the leaves where there had been bacteria, and we nursed it back to life. And it was a wonderful moment when we started seeing fresh shoots grow. It was like saying my father's come back, or he still lives on in some way. And his spirit lives on, because I think it symbolises his love of Shanghai, his obsessions with something extreme, tropical, jungle-like, dark, very un-British. When he came here as a boy in 1946, after the war, he came here with his mother and his sister. He couldn't believe the sort of dark, damp, small island he was going to have to live on. And throughout his life, I think he really remained an observer of life here. And I think his heart was still in Shanghai. So why did he keep the yucca alive for so long? After all, if you think about it, 1976 to his death in 2009, that Yucca was alive. I think it has to be something to do with, yes, his daughter gave it to him, of course, but also it must have reminded him, I think, of that formative time in his childhood.
I think Fay's story is very beautiful, and you can see photos of the yucca on the website ourplantstories.com, along with drawings that Fay made of the yucca in her father's house. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you will know that we always have a conversation with someone who shares the passion for the plant before learning how to grow it ourselves. I haven't forgotten Fay's question, why were Marks and Spencers selling yucca plants in the 1970s? And we do have the perfect person to answer it. But first, let me introduce you to the holder of a National Collection of Yuccas, Colin Smith.
I have got about 100 taxa.
Explain what that means
Right,
for
well,
us.
taxa can be different species, subspecies, hybrids and cultivars. So it's a mixture of all of those.
Before I open up to Fay's questions, can I just ask how many plants that translates into?
No.
Actual yucca plants.
I would say it's probably about 200. They're all over the place. They're in the garden, they're in the lean-to. The ones in the greenhouse I put around the garden during the summer months. There's a couple I've got in the house permanently.
Fay, have you got some questions for Colin?
I have, Colin. First of all, I'd love to know what type of yucca I might have bought in Marks and Spencer's Brighton store in December 1976.
I'm guessing it almost certainly will be Yucca elephantiapes, without a shadow of a doubt. Now recently renamed as Yucca gigantea. Mainly because they found a paper that was published about 6 months earlier than the one that was published saying it was Yucca elephantiapes. And as taxonomists do, they keep changing the names as they find older papers of mentioning things. I'm just waiting for the time they find an older paper that mentions yuccas under a different name, because we'll have to change the word yucca, won't we?
Colin, I mean, I'm very curious because I was able to buy this yucca quite easily, and if I remember rightly, there were a lot of yuccas around that time on sale, and they were being marketed. I mean, I remember in Homebase coming across them as well, and obviously yeah, M&S had lots. But I would have thought that our climate back in the 70s wasn't so sympathetic to growing yuccas. So I'm
Well,
very interested in
yeah.
how were we meant to look after them?
Well, I presume the one you got out of Marks and Spencers is probably actually meant to be an indoor yucca.
Oh,
They will take a little bit of frost, and I have planted one out because I propagated enough, and I did put one out. It got it was getting I have to protect it every year in bubble wrap, but it was getting quite large, and then we had a particularly nasty winter, and it died right back. But being a yucca, it's actually coming up from the base again now, and it actually looks healthier now coming up from the base than it has done for many years. But yeah, it's basically an indoor yucca, but given its head, it's a very large yucca. I have seen there's some specimens I've seen in Spain and that, where the trunk base is probably a metre across, if not more, and they start to produce new branches from the base. So they do get massive. If you walk along the Guadalquivir down in Seville, there's two massive plants there. Really, really, really good quality plants down there, but then that's their climate down there, isn't it? But yeah, they'll grow freely outside. But you've got to remember, this one comes from Veracruz in Mexico, so that's it's amazing it takes any frost at all when you think where it's coming from, and it originated.
okay. So who's behind the the export or the import, whatever the word would be, of yuccas to our country? I mean, who was behind it? Was it Mexico? Or was it
I'm
another country?
I'm guessing not. Mexico was, well, in those days Mexico may well have initially. I'd imagine it was probably Holland. The
Yeah.
Dutch, well, they still are big in the horticultural industry. They sometimes they import stuff from it's grown on in Portugal or Spain and then gets sent up to the nurseries in Holland and they distribute it. And I'm guessing Marks and Spencers would have got some sort of contract with them. Now they are relatively easy to propagate because they produce a nice long trunk. You can just saw the trunk into 8-inch sections or 18-inch sections and then just propagate it very easily. Just stick it in the ground. As long as conditions are warm enough, it will root. Did it ever, I might ask, did it ever flower?
Not that I'm aware of, but my father would have loved it if it had, I
Yeah,
think.
I'm just thinking it was probably too dark to stimulate it to flower, as I'm guessing.
Yeah. And what do you make of feeding it baby bio?
Um, Well, I wouldn't have done that myself. Yuccas actually, I mean, all the yuccas are basically like poor soils, and they're quite happy with poor soils. So yeah, it must have all its Christmases arrived at once. Somebody keep tipping food on it all the time, and yes, I mean, I feed mine about once a year with a slow release in the spring normally to get that when they want to burst into life. But that's all I do. It thrives on neglect. The people that tend to kill them are the people that go to overwater them. Basically, you should always pulse water them like you were doing. You go about once a fortnight and give it water. That's just the right thing to do. Give it a pulse of water. There's nothing worse than it sitting in a tray of water. That's when your problems start. So yeah, your way of treating it was absolutely dead right.
God, I wouldn't have known. But there we go. That's good to hear.
Colin, where did your first yucca plant come
Mine,
from?
it came slightly by default, but it was a present to my wife from Marks and Spencers of all places.
Gosh, that's
That arrived
amazing.
I suppose 1988. That was the first, arguably the first one in the collection.
OK, at this point, I feel we need to return to that M&S question. I started by contacting the company archive, and they sent 2 articles from 1979 and 1981 featuring yuccas. But there wasn't a lot about why this plant. However, they suggested I try the Marks and Spencer Facebook page, which I did. And quite quickly, someone suggested I contact Lord Rose, who became the chief executive and chairman of the shop in later life. But his roots go much deeper.
This goes back probably to the early 70s. I joined M&S in the early 70s, but I wasn't in horticulture probably until the end of the 70s. But I ran the department for a while. But, I can remember people like my friend Martin Hudson. He was the manager of the horticulture department, and the chairman at the time was a guy called Lord Rayner, Derek Rayner. And Derek was a big plantsman. He had a big garden down in Tunbridge somewhere. And he knew a lot about plants. I knew nothing about plants, so he always used to come in and wind me up about this plant or that plant with a Latin name. One of the areas where people, when they did some research and asked them what they wanted, people said, well, we'd like to have, access to plants and whatever else. And M&S was at the forefront of bringing to the supermarkets horticulture. But horticulture in those days was quite a difficult thing to get right, because it does depend on making sure that you keep the product at a constant temperature to make sure you get life out of it and make sure that when it gets to your house it doesn't wilt within 5 minutes. One of the first places, or the easiest things to do, was to get into green plants and to potted plants before we went into fresh flowers, because fresh flowers was a much more difficult thing to handle. They're much more sensitive. So it then became apparent that Holland was the place where it was all happening, and the Dutch were very good at propagating this stuff, and they particularly propagated a plant called the Yucca plant, and mostly because it was green, small, hardy, and indestructible. I mean, you really couldn't, if you didn't water it for a month or two, it really didn't matter. It said if you didn't water it. And, people wanted to sort of buy a yucca plant, put it onto their little shelf in their front room with the net curtains behind it, and they had a bit of green in the house. And it didn't require too much. And they sold like hotcakes. It was just one of those things that it became a sort of, I must have an item. You've got a yucca plant, I must have a yucca plant. Oh, where did you get that yucca plant? I bought it at Marks and Spencer. And we controlled the market pretty well, because everybody else was dealing with it on a small-time basis. And we were the first ones, if you like, to sort of commoditize it, industrialize it, and start selling large volumes, which meant two things. One is you could get a consistent size plant. Secondly, you could reduce the price. And thirdly, you could therefore increase the volume that you sold. So it was a win-win situation. And from there, I mean, the yucca plant is iconic, and I think this was a time of great change. And people want change, and they want newness, and they want innovation, and they want excitement. And the innovative thing at the time was the yucca plant. But really, that was the genesis of horticulture in the house, supermarkets moving into that space. And now, if you look at the total plant sales of fresh flowers in the UK, plants in the UK, I think if you take into account garden centres, the supermarkets between them have a massive market share on fresh flowers and plants because they do it so well.
I suspect now, when I drive around London, I can see some enormous yucca plants in front gardens.
I'm sure they got moved from the house into the garden, yeah. But you can't kill them. They're probably going to turn out to be a pest at some point in time, Sally. Frankly, they're hideous.
Do you not like them?
Well, I personally don't like one. I haven't got one anywhere near my garden, but I haven't seen a yucca plant in a pot in a home, I must say, for some time. But I'm sure if I went to some leafy suburb somewhere, then I could find some elderly lady or gentleman who's probably still got one somewhere or some. I don't know if you can still buy them. I mean, I haven't actually looked, but I don't know if you go. I must go into M&S or Tesco's or Sainsbury's and see if they're actually still selling them. I think if I went to my florist and said, "Can I have a yucca plant?" they'd look at me a bit sideways.
There could be a revival. We could start it.
Well, I think you're the lady. You're the girl to do it. Get to start the Yucca Revival Society.
So Lord Rose may not be a fan, but what does Colin love about yuccas?
It's the flowers, I think, is really the spectacular thing. I mean, elephantiae or gigantea, actually, for the size of the plant, the size of because they mainly produce a panicle of flowers. Well, on that one, if you get a panicle, it will probably be at best about 8 inches, so it barely gets out of the leaves. Some of the more spectacular ones, you're looking at 2-3 meters. There's some really, really spectacular flowering ones out there.
That does beg the question, and we will obviously do a how to grow at the end, although I think we're answering many of these questions, but how do you get it to flower?
It's good light seems to be the main thing. I mean, I've got one, but they don't all flower. There are some species that will flower reliably and regularly. Probably the best one, the one I always recommend if you have no other yucca, is one called recurvifolia, although it seems to have slightly disappeared at the moment from the nurseries and the horticultural industry. But it's probably because it is the most basic, but it is such an easy one to grow, and once it's big enough, it will flower for you every year without fail, and you'll get the panicle on that is usually between 1 and 2 meters.
So if we came to your house, would we see yuccas in flower all over the place?
If you would in the summer months, you would I've got one flowering at the moment, but I've got several more that are in the process of flowering. I always reckon probably beginning of July is peak flowering season.
So how could Fay get hers to bloom?
That is a very difficult. That one is actually quite reluctant to bloom in Britain. I only have heard.
You have to take it somewhere, Fay.
Yeah, I have. Move it to Spain, and it might be more amenable to bloom.
Yes, well, it's quite poignant actually, Colin, because my mother died in Spain.
Oh,
so
sorry to hear.
No. It's just life.
Yeah.
When I was young and she was young, so I like the fact that there's a connection to Spain. It's rather poetic for me, actually.
But yes, I've seen them flowering in Spain, and I've seen them flowering in the south of France. I have never seen one flowering in Britain, but I did hear there was one in a foyer somewhere of a hotel in London that had flowered. And that's the only one I've heard of in Britain that's flowered. I don't know what it is about. It's probably a light thing.
Will you share some photographs with us, Colin, so we can share those on the website? Because I just think many of us have just never seen a yucca plant in flower.
Okay, yeah.
We're growing the wrong one, Fay. We need to grow different yucca plants.
Really, yes. I mean, Colin, can you describe for listeners what the flower looks like, what colour it is, what shape it is?
Right, they are the flower shape. Well, the flower kind of slightly changes during the day and night. Yuccas are predominantly pollinated by night-flying moths, so they tend to open up at night and be bell-shaped, and then a lot of them then just close up during the day.
And are they a bright colour?
The colours are predominantly white. There's some hints of green, there's some with hints of purple, reds, but they're predominantly white because they're white flowering, because they're attracting moths at night. The story with the yuccas and their pollination is actually very interesting. They have evolved, or co-evolved, with a particular group of moths which exclusively pollinate them. So they don't produce nectar. All they'll do is attract the moths in. The moths gather a ball of pollen, and then they stuff it down the stigmatic chamber, which is at the top of the flower. And then while they're doing that, they also lay a few eggs around the base. So the larvae then burrow in, and they eat some of the seeds, and then obviously then there is enough seeds then to be dispersed. So it's an exclusive deal they've got going between them. It's actually, originally there were about 4 moths described doing this, but it's now beginning to look much more complicated than this. I think they've recorded now about 16 different species doing this. There's also, now they've discovered a group of moths who are false yucca moths, in as much as they still lay their eggs and burrow into the ovary and eat the eggs, but they don't actually pollinate it, so they're freeloaders. So the biology's got more and more complicated.
And if you take a plant like a yucca, which is not a native plant to the UK, and you grow it, this might be a daft question, but how come there are still moths that are attracted to that yucca, even though this is not a native plant to this country at all? It still finds the moth, or a moth that will
No, unfortunately not. Then that species does not exist in the UK. I have a feeling they might have accidentally introduced it to Spain, mainly because I've seen yucca pods on yuccas in Spain in sufficient numbers to make me a bit suspicious that they not only brought the compost in, because the moth overwinters in the compost at the base of the plant. So I am guessing that they brought in a few plants, despite EU rules about bare-rooted plants and all that. They brought in stuff in pots which has had a few yucca moths in the compost.
So you don't see pods because we don't have
You
those
normally
moths,
don't
so
see.
your yuccas won't be pollinated.
Exactly. In the UK, you will not see pods. On saying that, I have occasionally found the odd plant that has got a pod on it, which it's usually in a situation where there's a very congested head of several flower spikes together, and I'm guessing the wind has just coincidentally knocked them about enough, and somehow a bit of pollen's actually managed to get into the stigmatic chamber. But I've only seen that about 3 times in 30 years, so it is pretty unusual.
I feel we should do a how to grow, and I know we've touched on some of these things, but I mean, if someone was starting out and they haven't got any house plants, or they don't have a yucca plant, Colin, where would you start? Would you be down at B&Q or M&S getting one of the ones like Fay has, or would you seek it slightly differently?
No, that's fine. You get one of the wonderful thing about Yucca gigantea is so amenable to live in a pot. And I mean, I've had one in the same. It's been lived in the same pot now for 20 odd years. I've never repotted it. The top because the elephant type is as its old name suggests, it's like an elephant's foot the way it spreads out, and there's only a little rim around the edge of the pot now which hasn't actually got trunk on it. I can't think of any other plant, well, there's very few plants that would actually tolerate living like that, but it's still going strong. But saying that, not all yucca species are that amenable to living in a pot. If you try to grow, say, the Joshua tree in a pot, 2 years if you're lucky, because it goes down looking for water, goes round and round the base of the pot until you overwater it, then it rots, and the rot goes right up through the plant and kills it. So
position, where should you put it once you've got your yucca?
I would always put them
Where
in a
should you put
sunny
it?
position. I think they like good light at the end of the day, and they'll grow better in good light. They will tolerate shade or less.
So south-facing window.
Oh,
if you've got one?
south-facing window. Just be wary putting things too close to a south-facing window, because right against the glass you can get scorch. Especially if the leaf is actually leaning on the window, you get bright sunshine on that and it'll scorch it. But apart from that,
And how often do we water it?
It depends on the time of year. This time of year, I'm probably doing it once a week.
And if you wanted to find something a little bit more unusual, not that we're saying the Marks and Spencer's one is not a good one to have, but if you wanted to get an unusual one, or if Fay is starting to build a collection, you know how it starts, Fay.
Yeah, things get out of control. I do appreciate that.
What could she look for? And where would she find it?
Where would you find it? Well, if you live in London, I think there's the Palm Centre. If I'm allowed to advertise for the Palm Centre, they usually have a few. There's a place called Plant Base down on the Kent-Sussex border. They usually have a few. And Architectural Plants used to have a few. I don't think their collection is as big as... And I've recently actually acquired a couple of new specimens to replace up in Norwich.
We can put all the links on the website.
Yeah.
I mean, what one would you look for? Can you give us a couple of names?
If you want it, what plants you mean? Depends how challenging you want it, really. That is the question. I've got the two new ones I've acquired. One is called Rigida, which I think would be interesting. I can keep it. Theoretically, as long as you don't get a stupid winter, it should survive in a very sheltered position in the garden. But one I would look out for, and it's a lovely plant and it's perfectly hardy, is one called Rostrata. If you want something a bit unusual, get a Rostrata. They produce until they get big. They just have a single trunk, a nice glaucous green leaves. The only downside of them, when you're weeding, be wary of the leaves. Don't just have a spine on the end of it, but they have teeth on the edge of the leaf as well. So you have to put your hand right in underneath, lift them up out of the way, and then weed underneath. Don't just dive in, otherwise you're going to lacerate your hands. But they're a lovely plant, and I've got 3 in the garden and 1 in a pot.
And in winter, will they survive outside, or will you have to
Yeah,
bring them inside?
the Rostratas live outside, totally unprotected. Yeah, totally unprotected they are.
So, Fay, are you going to increase your collection, or are you going to stick with the one you've got?
Twist or stick.
Well, I've certainly made copious notes on all of that.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at the websites, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, why not?
Yeah. So the one in Norwich is called Urban Jungle.
Yeah, I think we need a little bit more variety, don't we? I mean, I get that, you can produce masses of the one that we all possibly have, but I feel like there's a little more more adventurous. We could find different ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the typical lifespan of a yucca? I mean, can you generalise?
It's a problematic thing for a national collection holder, because quite a few of them can probably live for several hundred years. And most of my collection, if they're left alone, will outlive me by a long way. Like the Joshua tree, well, I had a Joshua tree, it got up to over 2 metres till, unfortunately, it got too big for the greenhouse and it got frosted and I lost it. But when you go to, California, there's Joshua trees 30 or 40 feet high, and they're clearly hundreds of years old.
I'm very happy about that, because that means that my one can be handed down to my children.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
If they want to look after it,
Yeah.
they can hand it possibly down to theirs.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they have children. So that is wonderful.
And
Very
what
happy.
you can...
Real heirloom, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah, but what you can also do is propagate from it, and then every grandchild and every great-grandchild can have their own plant.
Oh, I love that idea.
So yeah, when you've got a spare shoot, chop it off. Do it in the summer months when it's warm, and then just keep it warm. Gritty compost, and when it roots and it's ready to go, hand it on.
Wonderful.
So every
Great
member of your
advice.
family can have a piece of that yucca.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
I do wonder what happened to some of those other yuccas from the 1970s. I hope we have inspired you to have another look at this plant. Our Plant Stories is an independent podcast, researched, produced and presented by me, Sally Flatman. And if you have enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review it, as that means more people may find the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.